Leslie's empire crumbles in an instant when her secret schemes are exposed, her bank accounts frozen, and an enigmatic woman appears, turning her world upside down. Who is this mysterious figure, and how far will she go to seize control? Secrets, betrayal, and high-stakes power collide in a confrontation no one saw coming. The moment Leslie realized her carefully guarded assets were no longer secure, the walls of her meticulously constructed life seemed to implode inward. She had long known that wealth could be both a shield and a weapon, but never had she imagined that someone, somewhere, could dismantle her plans with such silent, unrelenting precision. The bank accounts she had relied upon, the carefully orchestrated portfolio of investments, the invisible threads that connected her power to the world outside, all of it had frozen in an instant, inaccessible, untouchable. A cold dread spread through her chest, expanding into a panic that clawed at her reasoning, yet beneath it, a simmering anger ignited. Her mind raced with suspicion, betrayal, and a dangerous clarity. Someone had orchestrated this, and that someone was not a stranger. She felt the first tremor of movement in the air before she saw her. The woman appeared as if summoned by Leslie's deepest fears, stepping into the room with a calm, deliberate authority that immediately established dominance. Every inch of her presence screamed control, poised posture, measured gait, eyes that seemed to see through walls, documents, and every layer of deception Leslie had thought impossible to penetrate. Her face, though composed, radiated a power that was equal parts intelligence and menace. There was no question, this was not a random intervention. This was a reckoning, and it had found its mark. Leslie's pulse accelerated, her body both freezing in awe and thrumming with instinctive rage. Who was this woman, and how had she gained the knowledge and means to dismantle every safeguard Leslie had built over years? The woman's actions, though minimal, conveyed total command. She moved toward Leslie's desk with a grace that was unsettling, scanning the contents as if reading an invisible ledger of misdeeds and ambitions. Each step emphasized Leslie's vulnerability, forcing her to confront not just the immediate threat but the extent of her own miscalculations. Every moment that passed without a word seemed to stretch endlessly, allowing Leslie's mind to replay past decisions, the deals she had manipulated, the people she had deceived, the alliances she had betrayed. It was a full reckoning, arriving not as judgment from an abstract force but as the calculated presence of a living, breathing adversary who had penetrated every layer of her life. Anger surged first, a wildfire of indignation and fear, but it was soon complicated by a more insidious force, doubt. Doubt about who this woman really was, about her own capacity to fight back, about the very structures she had believed were unassailable. Leslie's inner conflict expanded as she realized the stakes. The woman's identity was a mystery, yet her capabilities suggested extensive preparation, intelligence gathering, and resources far beyond anything Leslie had anticipated. Was this a representative of the bank? A rival with intimate knowledge of her finances? Or someone whose motives were entirely personal, driven by a vendetta that intertwined with Leslie's own misjudgments? The ambiguity itself became a weapon, a psychological pressure that tightened like a vice, constricting her reasoning, fueling paranoia, and magnifying every fear into a tangible threat. Leslie began to see the fragility of her own confidence, the illusions of security she had woven over years now unraveling in real time. The freezing of the bank accounts acted as more than a financial obstacle, it became a symbolic imprisonment, a manifestation of control wielded by another human being. Leslie's mind, trained for negotiation, strategy, and dominance, raced to formulate contingencies, but each scenario unraveled before it could solidify. The woman's presence rendered traditional defenses irrelevant. No phone call could summon aid, no legal counsel could intervene quickly enough, no social leverage could counteract the immediate, direct authority she radiated. Leslie felt trapped in a labyrinth with walls that closed tighter with every heartbeat, each pathway to escape blocked by both the woman's calculated foresight and her own accumulated misjudgments. As Leslie processed the crisis, flashes of betrayal streaked through her memory. Her own decisions, often ruthless and self-serving, had created vulnerabilities she now wished she had foreseen. Individuals she had manipulated, colleagues she had undercut, rivals she had underestimated, all could have contributed to this exact scenario. The realization that the very structure of her power could be used against her sparked a mix of rage and self-loathing, creating a mental storm that left her alternately incapacitated and frenetically analytical. Vanessa, Joey, or Doug had never been involved in this. This intrusion came from a stranger whose presence carried authority, knowledge, and a will to punish precisely those weaknesses Leslie had relied upon to survive. The psychological tension mounted as the woman approached the frozen computer terminals. Leslie's eyes followed every step, every controlled movement, as the adversary inspected balances, documents, and accounts with a precision that was almost surgical. Each flicker of attention, each tilt of her head, each subtle adjustment of her posture conveyed the capability to unravel not just Leslie's finances but the very narrative of her life. The sense of inevitability grew unbearable. Nothing Leslie had done could undo the meticulous preparation of this figure, whose mastery over both perception and execution made conventional retaliation or negotiation seem impossible. Leslie's adrenaline surged, her chest tightening, as she recognized a rare and terrifying truth: she was facing someone whose competence exceeded her own in every conceivable way. Inner conflict deepened further. Leslie wrestled with instinctive reactions of resistance, defiance, and aggression against the cold recognition that such impulses might be futile. The urge to fight, to reclaim control, collided with the rational analysis of the adversary's apparent advantages. Every potential strategy seemed compromised, and the very act of acting rashly could accelerate disaster. Leslie's mind, always her strongest asset, became a battlefield where fear, anger, and tactical reasoning clashed violently, producing neither clarity nor comfort. She realized that survival would demand not force but acute psychological acuity, a careful calibration of every movement, gesture, and decision to avoid further exposure. As minutes stretched into a tense eternity, the woman paused, standing amidst the array of frozen data and inert accounts. She exuded patience, the kind born of long experience and absolute confidence. Leslie, feeling the weight of observation, sensed that every heartbeat was being counted, every glance evaluated, every sign of weakness noted and filed away in the silent ledger of judgment the woman maintained. The room became a crucible of anticipation, with Leslie trapped at its center. Her mind spiraled through potential motives. Personal revenge, professional sabotage, a calculated test of ethics, or perhaps a hidden alliance with someone else seeking control over her resources. The multiplicity of possibilities compounded fear into an almost physical sensation, pressing down on her with unrelenting force. The encounter intensified as Leslie began to consider the consequences of her own choices. She thought of the manipulations, secret accounts, clandestine transactions, and unspoken promises that had defined her existence. Every action now seemed a liability, every decision a potential gateway to ruin. The woman's silent scrutiny exposed these vulnerabilities in a way that words or confrontation never could. Leslie felt trapped not just by the immediate threat but by the cumulative weight of her life's trajectory, each misjudgment and ethical compromise magnified under the cold, unflinching gaze of the unknown interloper. Fear merged with anger, anger with regret, and regret with a desperate, primal need to survive. The woman's power was not merely derived from her financial or strategic prowess. It was psychological, existential, a mastery of human perception and vulnerability. Leslie realized that the freeze of the bank accounts and the immobilization of her resources was both literal and symbolic, a demonstration of control, a lesson in humility, and a warning that the world she had meticulously built could be dismantled by someone who understood the subtleties of power, observation, and timing. She felt herself shrinking under this realization, the illusion of invincibility shattered, leaving only raw vulnerability tempered by her still sharp intellect and desperate drive. By now, Leslie's inner landscape was a storm of conflicting emotions. She oscillated between plotting a counter-move, cursing her fate, analyzing her adversary, and reconciling with the bitter truth that this woman had anticipated, neutralized, and dominated every conventional form of resistance Leslie could conceive. In that moment, Leslie understood that her options were both limited and perilous. Every action carried risk, every inaction compounded vulnerability. The psychological tension was unbearable, yet fascinating in its clarity. She was trapped not by walls, locks, or threats of violence, but by the meticulous exploitation of her own life's patterns, choices, and vulnerabilities. She realized she had never faced an opponent so completely, ruthlessly, and logically prepared. And then, as the woman finally moved to leave, her presence a lingering shadow of authority and inevitability, Leslie was left with a stark awareness: her life, as she knew it, had irrevocably changed. The frozen accounts, the inescapable observation, the sudden awareness of a superior mind operating against her, these were not mere setbacks, they were a permanent recalibration of power. Every choice moving forward would have to contend with the reality of an adversary who had penetrated her defenses completely, who understood her ambitions, fears, and weaknesses, and who now held the ability to manipulate outcomes beyond Leslie's control. The encounter left Leslie shaken, terrified, and electrified with a dangerous energy, a combination of survival instinct, moral reflection, and the intoxicating, destructive thrill of being cornered by someone smarter, faster, and more ruthless than herself. The question of the woman's identity remained unanswered, a mystery poised to dictate every subsequent move Leslie would make, every calculation of risk, every strategy for reclaiming agency in a world that had suddenly become foreign and hostile. Leslie had no choice but to confront an uncomfortable truth: every misstep, every secret, every attempt at control could now be turned against her, and the woman who had entered her life was no ordinary adversary. She was a force of intelligence, patience, and power, someone whose motives were unfathomable, yet whose effectiveness was undeniable. Leslie's mind raced, weighing possibilities, calculating responses, balancing aggression against caution, morality against survival. Each moment stretched endlessly as she tried to anticipate the next move in a game she had never realized she was playing. And in that endless, nerve-shredding anticipation, Leslie understood that her life's trajectory, her control, and even her sense of identity were now contingent on understanding, anticipating, and responding to a figure whose skill, presence, and determination far exceeded anything she had encountered before. By the end of the day, Leslie felt the crushing weight of reality: the woman's arrival had not just frozen her bank accounts. It had frozen her confidence, immobilized her decision-making, and forced her to confront the starkest possible truth: that all her schemes, all her manipulations, all her calculated ambitions, could be dismantled in an instant by someone who combined intellect, foresight, and unyielding authority. Leslie was trapped in the center of a storm she could neither predict nor control, forced to reckon with an opponent whose identity remained unknown, yet whose power was undeniable, whose presence was inescapable, and whose impact would redefine Leslie's understanding of threat, strategy, and survival for the rest of her life.